He was Pope for 33 days. 33 days. The length of a summer vacation, the shelf life of a grocery store avocado. And then, one morning in September 1978, the most powerful religious leader on earth was found dead in his bed, alone, holding papers with a strange expression on his face. And the Vatican decided the best course of action was to skip the autopsy. No autopsy on the Pope, who died unexpectedly at 65 in perfect health. The Vatican's official explanation was that he had a heart attack, and they asked everyone, the press, the doctors, the cardinals, the watching world, to simply take their word for it, because apparently if there's one institution on earth you should trust unconditionally with a suspicious death, it's the one that also controls the investigation into it. If you enjoy watching history's most elegant cover-ups unfold in real time, consider subscribing. This is going to be that kind of story. To understand why a pope might be killed, or why so many people would believe he was, you have to understand the Vatican of 1978. The Catholic Church was not merely a religious body. It was a sovereign state, a financial empire, and a network of global influence that had outlasted every empire from Rome to the Habsburgs. It had survived the Reformation, the Enlightenment, 2 world wars, and Galileo, who they eventually forgave only 350 years later. Progress. By the late 1970s, the Vatican Bank, officially the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, had become something considerably less holy than its name implied. It had entangled itself with Italian financiers of questionable character, men like Roberto Calvi, nicknamed God's Banker, who was later found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London, and Michele Sindona, a banker with mafia connections who had laundered money through Vatican accounts. These were not peripheral figures. These were men who sat at dinner with cardinals. The Church was also in the middle of a theological identity crisis. The Second Vatican Council had thrown open windows that certain powerful men inside the institution desperately wanted nailed shut again. There was a faction, older, conservative, deeply connected, that had watched the Church modernize with the particular horror of people who believe they alone are the custodians of eternal truth. Into this environment in August 1978 stepped a man who was, by every account, completely wrong for the room. His name was Albino Luciani. He became John Paul I. He grew up poor in the Veneto region of northern Italy, the son of a socialist laborer. He knew what it was like to not have enough. This is relevant because, unlike many of the men who surrounded him in Rome, he had never confused the Church's mission with the Church's real estate portfolio. He was known for smiling, genuinely smiling, and not the practiced diplomatic smile of a man who has learned to perform warmth, but the actual expression of someone who found people delightful and the world, despite everything, amusing. The press called him Il Papa del Sorriso, the smiling Pope. The Italian media loved him instantly, which should have been his first warning that something was wrong. He had risen through the ranks as a bishop and cardinal in Venice. He was theologically moderate, pastorally warm, and intellectually serious. He wrote a book of imaginary letters to historical figures, including Mark Twain and Pinocchio. A man who writes a letter to Pinocchio is not a man who takes himself too seriously. He also believed that the Vatican Bank needed to be cleaned up. This was not a casual preference. Shortly before his death, he had reportedly been reviewing a list of Vatican Bank board members and their connections to Freemasonry, specifically to a lodge called Propaganda Do, or P2, which had infiltrated nearly every institution of Italian public life, and whose membership list, when eventually discovered by Italian police in 1981, read like a who's who of the Italian establishment: politicians, generals, judges, and allegedly churchmen. He was also said to be preparing to reverse the Church's position on artificial contraception. So to summarize, within 33 days of becoming Pope, Albino Luciani had apparently decided to reform the Vatican's finances, restructure its banking relationships, and revisit one of the most contentious moral positions in modern Catholic history. He had, in other words, made an impressive number of enemies in a very short time, even by Vatican standards. Here's where the history becomes murky, and the murk is telling. There was no single assassin with a known motive who has ever been charged, tried, or convicted. What there was, and what gives this story its uncomfortable weight, is a convergence of interests, a cluster of men for whom the new pope represented an existential threat. Roberto Calvi needed the Vatican Bank's protection to continue hiding the exposure of his fraudulent schemes that would eventually destroy him. Licio Gelli, the Grand Master of P2, had spent years building a shadow state within Italy, and a pope who might expose the Masonic infiltration of the church threatened the whole architecture. And within the church itself there were conservatives who watched this smiling man from Venice with something approaching dread. He was too accessible, too human, too unbothered by power. The question was never whether motive existed. The question was whether motive became method. On the evening of September 28, 1978, John Paul I met with the Secretary of State, Cardinal Jean Villot, who, it would later be noted, was himself reportedly a member of P2. The Pope had prepared a list of personnel changes. People would be removed. The Vatican Bank would be reviewed. Things would change. He retired to his room. He was never seen alive again. The next morning, a nun named Sister Vincenza brought the Pope his morning coffee at 4:30 a.m., as was custom. He did not answer. She found him sitting upright in bed, reading glasses on, papers in hand. The same papers he had been reviewing the night before, reportedly the very list of personnel and financial concerns that had occupied his final weeks. His face, according to witnesses, wore a slight smile. Peaceful, they said. Peaceful, which is either the most beautiful detail in the story or the most carefully constructed one. Cardinal Villot was notified. Villot then did something that strikes most observers as unusual. Before any doctor had been formally summoned, before any official pronouncement had been made, he ordered that certain items be removed from the Pope's room: the glasses, the papers, a bottle of medication. These items were never seen again. There was, as previously noted, no autopsy. The Vatican cited legal authority. As a sovereign state, they were under no obligation to permit one, and also cited what they described as the late Pope's personal modesty, his presumed reluctance to have his body examined. They argued this on behalf of a man who was dead and could no longer confirm or deny his preferences regarding post-mortem procedures. The body was embalmed within 12 hours, quickly enough that any standard toxicological analysis would have become, at best, complicated. The official cause of death: myocardial infarction, heart attack. The word of the Vatican issued without medical documentation, against the observations of everyone who had seen Albino Luciani alive and well the previous day. If you're keeping score at home, and do subscribe, because we will be keeping score, that's no autopsy, missing evidence, embalming within hours, and a cause of death declared by the institution with the most to lose from an alternative explanation. History would like to remind you that this is not subtle. Cardinal Villot organized the conclave that followed. The cardinals met and elected Karol Wojtyla of Poland, who became John Paul II. He was young, vigorous, anti-communist, and would go on to reign for 26 years, transforming the papacy, helping bring down Soviet communism, and becoming arguably the most geopolitically consequential pope of the modern era. He did not meaningfully reform the Vatican Bank. Roberto Calvi's bank collapsed in 1982. He was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London with bricks stuffed in his pockets. His death officially ruled a suicide, then later an open verdict after the family requested reinvestigation. His associates from P2 were never successfully prosecuted for it. The lodge was dissolved by Italian courts, but its members scattered into the establishment and mostly continued their careers without significant disruption. Licio Gelli fled to South America when P2 was exposed. He was eventually extradited, tried for various charges, and sentenced, though he died in 2015 at the age of 96, which suggests that at least some people do escape the full weight of history. The Vatican Bank continued to operate under a cloud of scandal for decades. A serious reform effort did not occur until the 21st century. As for the question of whether John Paul I was murdered, it remains officially, stubbornly, open. In 2017, Luciani's family formally requested that his remains be exhumed for forensic examination. The Vatican declined. Humanity's relationship with inconvenient questions has always been the same. Defer, obscure, wait long enough, and hope the questioners die first. It works more often than it should. Here's what the death of John Paul I tells us, not about the Vatican specifically, but about power in general. Institutions are not built to serve their stated purpose. They are built to survive. The purpose is the story institutions tell about themselves. Survival is what they actually optimize for. And when a leader arrives who takes the story seriously and who believes the organization should genuinely be what it claims to be, the institution does not celebrate this. It experiences it as a threat. Albino Luciani was dangerous not because he was radical, but because he was sincere. He smiled because he meant it. He wanted to reform the bank because he thought it was wrong. He cared about the poor because he had been one. He was, in every measurable way, what a pope is supposed to be, and he lasted 33 days. The people who outlasted him, the bankers, the conspirators, the careful men who spoke in corridors and removed evidence before the doctors arrived, they understood something he apparently did not, that institutions protect their own, that power, once accumulated, does not redistribute itself voluntarily. That smiling at people and meaning it is, in certain rooms, a form of naivety. Whether he was murdered or simply had the misfortune of a weak heart at a consequential moment, either possibility is in its own way a tragedy. Because if he was killed, it means power did what power does. And if he died naturally, it means the universe has a taste for dark irony that borders on editorial. The papers he was holding were taken. The questions he was asking were silenced. The investigation he never got was denied by the people it would have investigated. And somewhere in the careful, endless machinery of an institution that has outlasted every empire that has ever tried to replace it, the smiling man from Venice was filed away. A footnote, a minor mystery, a 33-day papacy, remembered mostly for what it promised and never delivered. History does not always give its reformers enough time. It does, however, give them enough time to make powerful enemies. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Subscribe, not because the algorithm demands it, but because somewhere a historian is watching civilization repeat itself, and it helps to not watch alone.